The worn leather of the valise handle cut into Clara Whitmore's palm as she shifted it from one hand to the other, watching the endless prairie roll past the train window. 3 days out from Boston, and already the landscape had transformed from crowded tenements and factory smoke to vast expanses of grassland that seemed to stretch beyond the curve of the earth itself. She pressed her fingers against the glass, feeling the vibration of the rails through her bones, and tried not to think about what she'd left behind, or rather, whom she'd escaped. The letter, carefully folded in her coat pocket, crinkled as she adjusted her position on the hard wooden bench. She'd read it so many times during the journey that the words had begun to blur together, but she could still recall every line of James Colton's careful script. I am a man of modest means, but honest character, seeking a good woman to share in the building of a life here in Wyoming territory. The land is hard, but rewards those who work it with respect. A lady didn't answer advertisements for mail-order brides. That's what her mother would have said. Back when her mother was still alive, and Clara's world consisted of needlework and Sunday services instead of dodging Uncle Tobias's drunken rages in the back of his hand. But Clara Whitmore was running out of options, and James Colton's letter had arrived like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. The conductor called out, "Dry Gulch, next stop!" and Clara's stomach clenched. She smoothed her traveling dress, her best, though the hem was fraying and the blue had faded to gray in places, and tried to see her reflection in the window glass, dark hair pinned severely back, pale face made paler by 3 days of poor sleep and poorer food. Would James Colton be disappointed? His photograph showed a clean-shaven man with kind eyes, though the image was too blurred to make out much detail. The train wheezed to a stop with a great billowing of steam and the screech of metal on metal. Through the window. Clara got her first look at Dry Gulch, Wyoming territory. If Boston was all brick and bustle, Dry Gulch was wood and whisper. False-fronted buildings lined a main street that was more dust than road. A few horses stood hip-shot at hitching posts, tails swishing at flies. Men in worn dungarees and wide-brimmed hats moved with the slow purpose of those accustomed to hard work and hot sun. Clara gathered her courage along with her valise and made her way to the door. The porter, a colored man with kind eyes, helped her down the steep steps. "Welcome to Dry Gulch, miss," he said, touching the brim of his cap. "Someone meeting you?" "Yes, Clara's words died as she saw him. James Colton stood near the platform, hat in hand, looking exactly like his photograph and yet entirely different. Taller than she'd expected, broader in the shoulder, with sun-weathered skin that spoke of years under the Wyoming sky. His hair was dark blonde, his jaw clean-shaven, and when he spotted her, his face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to genuinely warm. "Miss Whitmore." He approached with long strides, and Clara noticed he'd dressed in what must be his best, clean pressed shirt, string tie, pants that showed only a little trail dust. "I'm James Colton. I hope your journey wasn't too taxing." "Mr. Colton." Clara managed a small curtsy, suddenly aware of every eye on the platform. She'd known there would be talk. There always was when a woman answered an advertisement, but knowing and experiencing were different things. The journey was educational. He laughed, a rich sound that eased some of the knot in her chest. "I imagine it was. First time west of the Mississippi, first time west of Boston Common," Clara admitted. "Well then, let me be the first to welcome you to Wyoming territory." He reached for her valise, and she noticed his hands, strong, calloused, but gentle as he took the weight from her. "I've got a wagon waiting. Thought you might want to get settled before tomorrow." Tomorrow. Their wedding day. Clara had insisted on it in her letters. She was no loose woman, and if she was going to travel 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, it would be done proper and legal before she set foot in his home. James had agreed readily, even arranging for the circuit preacher to make a special stop. As they walked toward the wagon, Clara caught sight of another figure standing in the shadow of the depot building. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks. The man looked exactly like James, same height, same build, same facial features. But where James's expression was open and welcoming, this man's face was carved from stone. His clothes were darker, more worn, and he leaned against the building with a weight that spoke of bone-deep weariness. His eyes, when they met Clara's, were the color of winter sky before a storm. James followed her gaze, and his smile faltered slightly. "That's my brother, Jesse. I mentioned him in my letters. We share the ranch." Jesse Colton pushed off from the wall and approached with a gait that favored his left leg slightly. Up close, Clara could see the differences, a scar through his left eyebrow, lines around his mouth that spoke of pain rather than laughter, a way of holding himself that reminded her of the war veterans who sometimes begged on Boston's streets. "Ma'am." Jesse touched the brim of his hat, but didn't remove it, didn't smile, didn't offer his hand. His voice was rougher than James's, like he didn't use it often. "Mr. Colton." Clara wasn't sure what else to say. James hadn't mentioned his brother was his twin, hadn't mentioned the hardness that seemed to emanate from Jesse like heat from a stove. "Best get moving," Jesse said to James, not looking at Clara again. "Storm coming in from the north." Clara glanced at the sky, which seemed endless and blue, but James was already helping her up onto the wagon seat. "Jesse's got a sense for weather," he explained. "Saved more than one head of cattle by knowing when to move them to shelter." Jesse swung up onto his own horse, a raw-boned gray that looked as temperamental as its rider, and headed out without waiting. James clicked to the team, and they followed at a more sedate pace, leaving Dry Gulch and its staring inhabitants behind. The road, such as it was, wound through country that took Clara's breath away. The mountains rose to the west like the backbone of some slumbering giant, purple-gray in the afternoon light. The grass moved in waves with the wind, and the sky seemed impossibly vast, like God had taken a brush and painted it broader than anywhere else. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. "The ranch is about 5 miles out," James said, perhaps sensing her overwhelm. "It's not much, not like those big spreads down in Colorado, but it's good land. Water year-round from Willow Creek, good grass, shelter from the worst of the winter winds." "How long have you been here?" "Jesse and I came out in '81 after—" He paused, glanced ahead at his brother's rigid back. "After the war. Bought the land from a man who was heading back east. Been building it up ever since." Clara wanted to ask more. About the war. About why two brothers would travel so far from whatever home they'd known. But something in the set of James's jaw suggested those were stories for another time. Instead, she asked about the ranch, the cattle, the practicalities of life in Wyoming territory. James answered readily, his enthusiasm evident as he described their small herd. The cabin he and Jesse had built with their own hands. The plans he had for expansion. By the time they crested a low rise and the Colton Ranch came into view, the sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains. Clara's first thought was that James had been modest in his letters. The cabin was larger than she'd expected, built of good straight logs with real glass windows and a stone chimney that spoke of permanence. A barn and several outbuildings clustered nearby, and she could see cattle grazing in a fenced pasture. It wasn't wealth, but it was prosperity, honestly earned. Jesse had already dismounted and was leading his horse to the barn. He didn't look back as James helped Clara down from the wagon. "I've set up the spare room for tonight," James said, a flush creeping up his neck. "Tomorrow, after the preacher, well, tomorrow things will be different." Clara felt her own cheeks warm. She'd known what she was agreeing to when she answered his advertisement. But standing here in the fading light, about to enter the home of a man she'd met only hours ago, the reality of it threatened to overwhelm her. "Miss Whitmore, Clara." James set down her valise and turned to face her fully. "I know this isn't the usual way of things. I know you've taken a great risk coming here, but I want you to know. I'm a good man. I'll be a good husband to you. You won't regret this." Looking into his earnest face, Clara wanted to believe him. She'd traveled so far, burned so many bridges. There was no going back to Boston, no returning to Uncle Tobias and his rages. this was her life now, this cabin in the middle of nowhere. This man with his gentle hands and kind smile. And his brother who watched from the barn doorway with eyes that seemed to see too much. "I believe you, Mr. Colton," she said softly. "James. Please call me James. James." The name felt foreign on her tongue, but she supposed she'd have a lifetime to get used to it. Tomorrow she'd be Mrs. James Colton, a rancher's wife in Wyoming territory. Tonight, she was still Clara Whitmore from Boston, standing on the threshold of a new life and hoping, praying, she hadn't made a terrible mistake. As James showed her into the cabin, pointing out the kitchen, the main room with its massive fieldstone fireplace, the spare room where she'd spent her last night as an unmarried woman. Clara caught a glimpse of Jesse through the window. He stood by the corral, one hand on a horse's neck, staring out at the mountains where storm clouds were indeed beginning to gather. Just as he'd predicted. There was something in his stillness, in the way the dying light caught the planes of his face, that made Clara's breath catch. But then James was asking if she was hungry, if she needed anything. And Clara turned away from the window and the disturbing figure beyond it. Tomorrow she would marry James Colton. Tomorrow her new life would truly begin. Tonight, she would try not to think about his brother, or the way those storm-gray eyes had looked right through her, or the strange feeling that in gaining the life she'd thought she wanted, she might be losing something she didn't yet understand. The morning after her wedding. Clara woke to the sound of axes splitting wood and the low murmur of male voices drifting through the thin walls. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then the events of yesterday came rushing back. The simple ceremony in Dry Gulch's small church. James's warm hand holding hers. Jesse standing as witness with that same stone-faced expression. The wedding supper at the town's only restaurant, where curious eyes had followed their every move. The silent ride back to the ranch as darkness fell. And then, Clara pressed her hands to her burning cheeks. The marriage bed had not been what she'd expected. James had been gentle enough, but there'd been whiskey on his breath, more than she'd realized he'd consumed during their wedding supper. The encounter had been fumbling, brief, and afterwards he'd fallen into a heavy sleep, leaving Clara to stare at the unfamiliar ceiling and wonder if this was what all wives endured. Now, in the gray light of dawn, she could hear James's voice outside, cheerful and commanding. "Jesse, we need to check the north pasture fence today. That bull's been testing it again." Jesse's response was too low to make out, but Clara heard the doubt in his tone. She dressed quickly in one of her work dresses. She'd brought only 3, knowing the life of a rancher's wife would not call for Boston finery, and ventured into the kitchen. The stove was already hot, coffee bubbling in a blue enamel pot. Through the window, she could see the brothers by the wood pile. James was gesturing broadly, apparently outlining the day's work, while Jesse methodically split logs with an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice. Clara busied herself with breakfast, falling back on the skills her mother had taught her before the fever took her. Salt pork, biscuits, gravy, hearty fare for men who worked hard. She was just setting the table when the door opened and James entered, bringing the scent of fresh wood and morning air. "Well now, don't you look pretty as a picture?" he said, crossing to drop a kiss on her cheek. The gesture felt performative, like something he thought a husband should do rather than something he wanted to do. "Sleep well?" "Yes," Clara lied, noting that he didn't quite meet her eyes. "Breakfast is nearly ready. Smells wonderful. Jesse!" he called out the door. "Breakfast!" Jesse entered without acknowledgement, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. He moved to the wash basin, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked by various scars. Clara tried not to stare, busying herself with serving the food. The meal passed in relative quiet. James talked about the day's plans, the cattle that needed moving, the supplies they'd need from town next week. Jesse ate steadily, contributing only the occasional grunt or nod. Clara felt like a stranger at her own table, unsure of her place in this established routine. "I'll be riding out to Carson's place today. James announced as he pushed back from the table. "He owes me for that horse I sold him, and I aim to collect." "Carson's is 15 miles, Jesse said, his first complete sentence of the morning. "Be dark before you're back. Might stay the night if it gets late." James was already reaching for his coat. "You can show Clara what needs doing around here." Jesse's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Got work to do?" "So does she. Now she's a rancher's wife." James settled his hat on his head, then seemed to remember Clara's presence. "You'll be fine, won't you? Jesse'll take good care of you." Before Clara could respond, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. She stood there holding a dish towel, uncertain whether to feel abandoned or relieved. When she turned, Jesse was watching her with those unsettling gray eyes. "You know how to ride?" he asked abruptly. "A little. Side saddle, in Boston. Won't do you any good out here." He stood, reaching for his own hat. "There's work clothes in the chest in your room, James's mother's things. Put them on and meet me at the barn." Clara opened her mouth to protest. She was a married woman, not a hired hand. But Jesse was already out the door. She stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the tick of the clock on the mantel and wondering what she'd gotten herself into. The work clothes felt strange against her skin, a divided skirt that allowed her to sit astride, a man's shirt tucked in at the waist, boots that were a size too large. But when she emerged from the house, Jesse gave an approving nod. "Better. Can't work cattle in petticoats." He'd already saddled a gentle-looking mare. "This is Buttercup. She'll teach you what you need to know." The next hours were an education in more ways than one. Jesse was a patient teacher, if not a talkative one. He showed her how to mount, how to hold the reins, how to move with the horse instead of against it. When she finally managed to walk Buttercup around the corral without clutching the saddle horn, she caught what might have been approval in his eyes. "You'll do," he said, which from Jesse seemed like high praise. As the days passed, a pattern emerged. James would leave early, ostensibly to check distant pastures or conduct business in town. Often he wouldn't return until late, smelling of whiskey and tobacco, full of stories about people Clara didn't know. Jesse would work from dawn to dusk, and Clara found herself drawn into the rhythm of ranch life, whether she'd planned it or not. She learned to milk the 2 dairy cows, to gather eggs without getting pecked, to tell the difference between hay and straw. Jesse taught her wordlessly, demonstrating tasks with his scarred hands, correcting her mistakes with a grunt or a gesture. Unlike James's cheerful chatter, Jesse's silence felt comfortable, like a well-worn coat. It was while helping him mend harnesses in the barn that Clara first noticed his limp was worse than he let on. He'd been standing too long, and when he shifted weight, she caught the flash of pain across his features. "Your leg," she said without thinking. "You were wounded in the war?" Jesse's hand stilled on the leather. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Gettysburg. Took grape shot in the thigh. Doctors wanted to take the leg." He resumed working. I disagreed. "That must have been—" Clara searched for words. "Terrible. War's terrible. Coming home after can be worse." His voice was flat, matter of fact. "James didn't serve. Too young by a year. He doesn't understand what it changes." Clara thought of the restless energy that drove James from the ranch each day, the whiskey that helped him sleep each night. "I think the war changed everyone, whether they served or not." Jesse looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara felt seen in a way that made her breath catch. But the moment passed, and he turned back to the harnesses. "Best get these finished before dark." As the weeks turned into a month, Clara began to understand the rhythm of her new life. James was often gone, to town for supplies that never seemed to materialize, to neighboring ranches on business that kept him overnight, to anywhere but home. When he was present, he was jovial, affectionate in a distracted way, but there was a distance there, like he was playing the role of husband without fully inhabiting it. The marriage bed remained a source of fumbling disappointment. James came to her perhaps twice a week, usually after drinking. And the encounters left Clara feeling hollow and somehow wrong. She'd overheard married women in Boston whispering about wifely duties. But surely there was supposed to be more than this mechanical coupling in the dark. It was Jesse who filled the empty spaces. Not with words. He remained taciturn as ever, but with presence. He was there when she burned the biscuits, scraping the pan without comment and showing her how to better gauge the heat. He was there when she got thrown from Buttercup, lifting her from the dirt with gentle hands, checking for injuries with a thoroughness that made her skin tingle. He was there in the evenings when James was not, sitting by the fire cleaning tack or mending clothes while she read from one of the few books in the house. One night, James had been gone for 3 days, to a cattle auction, he'd said, and Clara found herself crying over the wash basin, overwhelmed by loneliness and the growing certainty that she'd traded one form of misery for another. She didn't hear Jesse enter until he cleared his throat. "You all right?" The question seemed to cost him something. Clara wiped her eyes hastily. "Yes, I'm fine." "No, you're not." He moved closer, and she could smell leather and wood smoke, the honest scent of hard work. He's not a bad man, just weak in some ways. Always has been." "He's my husband," Clara said, though the words felt like ash in her mouth. "I know." Jesse's voice was rough. "Doesn't mean you deserve—" He didn't finish, but Clara understood. She turned to face him fully, seeing the pain in his eyes that matched her own. "Why didn't you write to me? The letters, they were different from him. Deeper. I thought—" Jesse went very still. "You knew?" "I suspected. The handwriting was the same, but the words— James doesn't think about land having moods or describing sunset colors. That was you. He asked me to help, said he didn't have the words." Jesse's hands clenched at his sides. "I should have said no. Should have what? Should have written my own damn letter." The words came out harsh, angry. "Should have been the one meeting you at that train." Clara's heart was racing. This was dangerous ground. Treacherous as spring ice. "But you weren't." "No." Jesse turned away. "I wasn't. And now you're his wife, and that's the end of it." He left her there in the kitchen, but Clara noticed he'd brought in extra wood for the stove, filled the water bucket fresh from the well, caring for her in the only ways he could allow himself. The next morning, she woke to find a heavy blanket laid over her thin quilt, one from Jesse's own bed. She realized, outside, snow was falling, the first of the season. Through the frosted window, she could see Jesse's footprints leading from the house to the barn, and beside them, the tracks where he'd stood outside her window in the night, checking that she was warm enough. Clara pressed her hand to the cold glass, palm covering those footprints, and wondered how much longer she could pretend not to see what was happening between them. James might hold the legal claim, but it was Jesse who was slowly, inexorably, claiming her heart. The November wind howled through the mountain passes like a living thing, driving snow before it in blinding sheets. Clara had never experienced weather like this in Boston. There, winter arrived gradually, politely. Here in Wyoming, it descended like a hammer blow. She'd been helping Jesse move the cattle to lower pasture when the storm hit. One moment the sky was gray but calm. The next, the world disappeared into a white wall of fury. Clara lost sight of Jesse, of the cattle, of everything except Buttercup's mane whipping against her face. "Clara!" Jesse's voice came from somewhere to her left. "Stay on the horse! Follow my voice!" She tried to turn Buttercup toward the sound, but the mare was frightened, dancing sideways, threatening to bolt. Clara's hands, numb even through her gloves, could barely hold the reins. Then Jesse was there, materializing out of the white like a ghost. He grabbed Buttercup's bridle, his own horse pressing close. "There's a line shack about a mile north. We'll have to shelter there." Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. Jesse tied Buttercup's reins to his saddle horn, ensuring they wouldn't be separated again. The journey to the line shack felt endless, every minute an hour, every yard a mile. When the small structure finally loomed out of the storm, Clara nearly wept with relief. Jesse had to lift her from the saddle. Her legs were too numb to support her. He half carried her inside while the horses crowded under the lean-to attached to the shack's side. The interior was sparse, a pot-bellied stove, a narrow bunk with threadbare blankets, a few shelves with emergency supplies. But it was shelter, and that was everything. "Get those wet clothes off," Jesse ordered, already feeding kindling into the stove. "There's blankets in that chest." Clara's hands shook too badly to work the buttons. After a moment, Jesse turned from the now crackling fire and saw her struggle. Something shifted in his face, a crack in the wall he kept between them. "Here." His hands were gentle as he helped with the buttons of her coat, the laces of her boots. He kept his eyes averted, maintaining her modesty even as he worked to save her from the cold. When she was down to her chemise and petticoats, dry enough to preserve both warmth and propriety, he wrapped her in blankets and settled her close to the stove. Only then did Clara notice he was favoring his bad leg more than usual, and his face was drawn with pain. "You're hurt," she said. "Old wound doesn't like the cold." He was struggling with his own boots, and Clara could see his hands were as numb as hers had been. "Let me help." She rose, still wrapped in blankets, and knelt before him. It was an intimate position, one that sent heat to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the stove. But Jesse needed help, and she owed him her life. She worked his boots off, noticed the way he bit his lip against the pain when she had to tug. His socks were soaked through, his feet like ice. Without thinking, she took them between her hands, chafing warmth back into them. "Clara!" Her name came out strangled. "You shouldn't—" "Hush!" She kept her eyes on her task, knowing that if she looked up, if she met his eyes, something would shatter between them that couldn't be repaired. "You saved my life. Let me do this." The storm raged outside, sealing them in their own small world. Jesse eventually pulled his feet away, mumbling something about checking the horses. But the damage was done. The careful distance they'd maintained was dissolving like snow in spring rain. When he returned, she had found coffee and hardtack in the supplies, such as they were. They sat close to the stove, shoulders almost touching, sharing the meager meal in silence. The wind screamed around the corners of the shack, and Clara shivered despite the warmth. "Will James worry?" she asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. "He's in town, probably holed up at the Golden Eagle." Jesse's voice held no judgment, just weary acceptance. "Won't even know there's a storm until tomorrow." Clara stared into her coffee cup. "He goes there often. The Golden Eagle. Yes. There are women there, aren't there?" Jesse was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, yes. The confirmation of what she'd suspected shouldn't have hurt. Her marriage was already a hollow thing. But tears pricked her eyes anyway. She'd traveled so far, given up so much. For what? To be abandoned for saloon girls while she slowly froze on a Wyoming ranch? "I'm sorry," Jesse said quietly. "You deserve better." "Do I?" Clara laughed, but it came out cracked. "A woman who answers a mail-order bride advertisement? Who marries a stranger? Maybe I'm getting exactly what I deserve." "Don't!" The word came out fierce. Jesse turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "Don't ever say that. You're brave, coming out here, strong. You work harder than any woman I've known, never complaining, never—" He stopped himself, jaw clenched. "Never what?" "Never looking at me the way you're looking at me now," he said roughly. "Like I'm something more than a broken-down soldier who can't even protect his brother's wife from his failings." "You're not broken." Clara reached out without thinking, her hand covering his scarred one. "And you protect me every day. You're the one who makes sure there's wood for the stove, water in the bucket. You're the one who taught me to ride, to work, to survive here. You're the one who—" She stopped, realizing she was saying too much. "The one who what?" His hand had turned under hers, fingers interlacing. "The one who sees me," she whispered. "Not just a wife or a woman or someone to warm a bed. You see Clara." The fire crackled. The wind howled, And Jessie Colton slowly, carefully, as if she might bolt, raised their joined hands to his lips. The kiss he pressed to her knuckles was light as snowfall, hot as flame. "I've seen you since the moment you stepped off that train," he said against her skin. "Saw your courage and your fear and your determination. Saw the way you held your head high even with the whole town staring. Saw you choose James and wanted to howl like that wind out there. Jessie, I wrote those letters thinking I was helping my brother find a wife. Instead, I was falling in love with a woman I'd never met. Every word you sent back, every thought you shared." He released her hand, pulled away. "I should have burned them. Should have told James to write his own damn letters. Should have done a lot of things different." Clara's heart was thundering. This was the moment she'd been both dreading and longing for. The truth laid bare between them like a blade. "That first letter," she said softly, "about the land having moods, about building something lasting. I read it and thought, here's a man who understands loneliness, who knows what it is to want more than just existing. I fell in love with those letters. Jessie, with the man who wrote them." "But you married James." "I married the name signed at the bottom." "If I'd known." She trailed off. What good were what-ifs now? Jessie stood abruptly, paced to the small window. "Storm's getting worse. We'll be here until morning at least." Clara recognized the withdrawal, the wall going back up, but something had shifted between them. Fundamental as tectonic plates, they couldn't go back to pretending. "I'm tired of being cold," she said quietly. He turned. "I'll add more wood to—" "That's not what I meant." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Jessie's face was a war between desire and duty, want and honor. Clara rose, still wrapped in blankets, and crossed to him. She had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "I'm James's wife-in-law," she said, "but I've never been his in any way that matters. He doesn't want me. Jessie, not really. He wants the idea of a wife, someone to keep house while he—" She stopped, swallowed. "I'm tired of being alone in a marriage bed. Tired of feeling like I'm not enough. Tired of pretending I don't know who really owns my heart." Jessie's hands came up to frame her face, and she could feel them trembling. "If we do this, there's no going back. I'm not a good man. Clara, a good man wouldn't want his brother's wife, wouldn't be standing here about to—" She rose on her toes and kissed him, silencing his protests. For a moment he stood frozen. Then a sound broke from his throat, part groan, part surrender, and his arms came around her, crushing her against him. This was nothing like James's fumbling in the dark. Jessie kissed her like a drowning man gasps for air, like a starving man falls on bread. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling pins free until it tumbled around her shoulders. Clara felt devoured, cherished, alive in a way she'd never experienced. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Jessie rested his forehead against hers. "Clara, sweet God, Clara, please," she whispered. "Just tonight, just once, let me know what it's supposed to feel like." Jessie pulled back to search her face. Whatever he saw there broke his last resistance. He kissed her again, softer this time, deeper. His hands mapped her shoulders, her waist, learning her through the blankets. When he lifted her, carried her to the narrow bunk, Clara felt no fear, only rightness. "I'll be gentle," he promised, settling beside her. "If you want to stop, I won't want to stop." She touched his face, tracing the scar through his eyebrow. The lines pain had carved. "Show me, Jessie, show me everything." Outside, the storm raged on, sealing them in their temporary paradise. Inside, by the light of fire and the warmth of long-denied desire, Clara discovered what she'd been missing. Jessie's scarred hands were infinitely gentle, worshipping her body with a reverence that brought tears to her eyes. He took his time, stoking her need until she was begging, then carried her over the edge into a pleasure she hadn't known existed. Afterwards, they lay entwined on the narrow bunk, Clara's head on Jessie's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. She could feel his fingers in her hair, gentle and wondering. "What have we done?" he asked quietly. What we both needed. Clara answered, what we both wanted. He's my brother. I know. You're his wife. I know that too. Jessie was quiet for a long moment. Then, I love you. God help me. I love you more than honor, more than duty, more than my own worthless life. Clara lifted her head to look at him. In the firelight, his face was vulnerable in a way she'd never seen. And I love you. Have loved you since before I knew your face. They didn't speak of tomorrow, of consequences, of the inevitable return to a reality where she wore another man's ring. They had this night, this storm-gifted isolation, and they made the most of it. When they came together a second time, it was with the desperate passion of those who know paradise is temporary. Near dawn, the wind finally died. Clara woke to find Jessie dressed, adding wood to the stove. The careful distance was back in place, though she could see the effort it cost him. Storm's passed, he said without looking at her. We should be able to make it back by noon. Clara rose, dressed in clothes that smelled of wood smoke and impossible dreams. They didn't speak as they saddled the horses, didn't touch as they began the ride home. But when the ranch came into view, Jessie finally broke the silence. I won't apologize, he said. I should, but I won't. Last night was everything. Clara finished. I know. They saw James's horse in the corral, and Clara's heart sank. Her husband was home. Her husband who didn't love her, who preferred town girls to his wife, who would never know what had transpired in that line shack. Or would he? Could he see it on their faces, smell it on their skin? As they rode into the yard, James emerged from the house, looking haggard but attempting cheer. There you are. I was worried when the storm hit. Should have known Jessie would take care of you. The irony of the statement was not lost on any of them. Clara dismounted, not meeting Jessie's eyes. Yes, he took excellent care of me. She walked into the house, leaving the brothers in the yard, but she could feel Jessie's gaze following her, could feel the shape of his hands branded on her skin, the taste of him on her lips, the weight of what they'd done and couldn't undo settling over her shoulders like snow. The days following the storm passed in careful avoidance. Jessie found reasons to work the farthest corners of the ranch, while Clara buried herself in household tasks that didn't truly need doing. She scrubbed floors that were already clean, mended clothes that weren't torn, and tried not to think about the way Jessie's hands had felt against her skin. James, oblivious to the tension, fell back into his usual patterns. He'd disappear after breakfast, returning late smelling of whiskey and perfume, full of stories about poker games and cattle deals that never seemed to materialize. Clara had stopped asking where he went. It was nearly 2 weeks later when everything unraveled. James had been drinking steadily since noon, celebrating some nebulous business opportunity with a rancher from Laramie. By evening, he was well into his cups, voice too loud, movements too loose. You're a cold woman, Clara, he slurred, swaying in the kitchen doorway. Man comes home expecting a warm welcome from his wife, and what does he get? Silence and turned backs. Clara continued kneading bread dough, not trusting herself to respond. Through the window, she could see Jessie in the barn, deliberately staying clear of the house. I said you're cold. James's hand slammed down on the table, making her jump. Look at me when I'm talking to you. She turned, seeing the ugly twist to his features that whiskey brought out. What would you have me say? James? How about welcome home, husband? How about acting like you're glad to see me instead of looking like you swallowed lye? You've been gone 3 days. Clara said quietly. You didn't tell me where you were going or when you'd return. How can I welcome what I don't expect? His face darkened. Don't take that tone with me. I don't answer to you, woman. You answer to me. I'm your wife, not your property. The words were a mistake. James crossed the kitchen in 2 strides, grabbing her wrist hard enough to bruise. You are what I say you are. I brought you here, gave you a home, a name. You'd be nothing without me. Let go. Clara tried to pull away, but his grip tightened. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe I've been too soft. His other hand came up to grip her chin, forcing her to meet his bloodshot eyes. Maybe you need reminding of your place. The barn door crashed open. Jesse stood there, taking in the scene with one glance. Let her go, James. This isn't your concern. Brother. James didn't release Clara. Man's got a right to discipline his wife. I said let her go. Jesse's voice was deadly quiet, more frightening than any shout. James laughed, an ugly sound. What's wrong, Jesse? Don't like seeing me touch what's mine. His grip shifted to Clara's hair, yanking her against him. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe my brother's been sniffing around my wife like a dog after table scraps. James, Clara gasped, but he cut her off. Shut up. I've seen the way you look at him. Seen the way he watches you when he thinks I'm not paying attention. James's voice was rising, spittle flying. My own brother and my wife. How long, Clara, how long have you been making a fool of me? You're drunk, Jesse said, moving closer. You're saying things you'll regret. Am I? James released Clara suddenly, shoving her away. She stumbled, catching herself on the table. Tell me, brother, tell me you haven't thought about it. Tell me you haven't wondered what she feels like, sounds like, tastes like. Jesse's hands clenched into fists. You're talking about your wife. Have some respect. Respect? James laughed again. Rich, coming from you. Saint Jesse, the war hero. Everyone thinks you're so noble, so righteous. But I know better. I know what you want. You don't know anything. Don't I? James swayed, pointing an accusing finger. That storm 2 weeks ago. Convenient, wasn't it? Getting trapped with her all night. Must have been cozy in that line shack. Clara's blood turned to ice. Jesse went absolutely still. What's wrong? James's smile was vicious. Cat got your tongues? Or are you remembering how you spent that night? Because I can guess. I can see it on both your faces. Nothing happened, Clara said, but her voice came out weak, unconvincing. Liar! The word cracked like a whip. James moved toward her again, and this time Jesse intercepted him. Enough! You're drunk and you're wrong. Go sleep it off. Get out of my way, Jesse. No! The brothers faced each other, a lifetime of resentments bubbling to the surface. Clara could see it all playing out. James's jealousy of Jesse's strength, Jesse's guilt over surviving the war when so many didn't, the woman standing between them like a lit fuse. James threw the first punch, wild and sloppy. Jesse sidestepped easily, but didn't retaliate. This seemed to enrage James more. Fight back, damn you, or are you too noble for that too? He swung again, this time connecting with Jesse's jaw. Jesse touched his split lip, looked at the blood on his fingers. I won't fight you, James. Because you're guilty. Because you know I'm right. James was breathing hard, face flushed. You took her, didn't you, in that shack? Took what was mine. She's not yours, Jesse said quietly. You can't take what was never given freely. The words hung in the air like a confession. James's face went from red to purple. You bastard! You self-righteous bastard! He launched himself at Jesse, and this time there was no avoiding it. The brothers crashed into the furniture, grappling, years of buried tensions exploding into violence. Stop! Clara tried to intervene, but a wild swing from James caught her across the cheek, sending her reeling. The sight of her falling seemed to snap something in Jesse. With controlled fury, he subdued James, pinning him against the wall. You can hate me all you want, he growled. But you don't touch her. Not ever again. You hear me? James spat blood. Get out, both of you. Get off my land. This is half my land, Jesse reminded him. Built with my hands same as yours. Then take your half. Take your whore and get out. I don't want to see either of your faces again. Jesse released him, stepped back. James slumped against the wall, chest heaving. In the sudden quiet, Clara could hear her own ragged breathing, feel the throb of her cheek where he'd struck her. Clara? Jesse moved toward her, but she held up a hand. Don't! She couldn't look at either of them. Just don't! She fled to her room, James's room, though he rarely slept there anymore. Through the thin walls, she could hear the brothers' voices, low and intense, though she couldn't make out the words. Eventually, the front door slammed, then slammed again. Silence fell. Clara touched her swelling cheek, tasted blood where her teeth had cut the inside of her mouth. This was what she'd feared, what she'd known would happen if the truth came out. But knowing hadn't prepared her for the reality of it, the violence, the ugliness, the devastating finality of James's words. A soft knock came at her door. "Clara?" Jessie's voice, rough with concern. "Let me see your face." She opened the door. Jessie stood there with a wet cloth and basin, his own lip still bleeding. Gently, he cleaned her face, checking her injuries with careful fingers. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I should have stayed away from the house. Should have known he'd—" "It's not your fault." Clara caught his hand. "None of this is your fault." "Isn't it?" His gray eyes were full of anguish. "I fell in love with my brother's wife, acted on feelings I should have buried, and now we face the consequences." Clara finished. "Together." Jessie set down the cloth, framed her face with his hands. "He meant it. He wants us gone. And maybe that's for the best." "Where would we go?" "I don't know. North, maybe Montana Territory, Canada, somewhere we can start fresh." He searched her eyes. "That is, if you'd come with me. I know I have no right to ask." Clara silenced him with a kiss, gentle because of their split lips. "You have every right. I choose you, Jessie. I chose you that night in the storm, and I choose you now." He pulled her against him, buried his face in her hair. "We'll have nothing, just what we can carry. I've got some money saved, but not much. It'll be hard. Clara, harder than anything you've known." "I've survived Uncle Tobias's fists and James's neglect. I can survive anything with you." She pulled back to look at him. "But what about James? This ranch is your life's work too. Let him have it." Jessie's voice was bitter. "It's poison now anyway. Every fence post, every acre would remind me of what happened here. Better to start clean." They spent the night planning, packing what little they could take. Jessie would gather what money and supplies he could, while Clara packed her few possessions. They'd leave at first light, before James sobered up enough to cause more trouble. In the darkness of her room, Clara allowed herself to grieve, for the dreams that had brought her west, for the marriage that had never been real, for the brother Jessie was losing. But beneath the grief was something else. Hope. She was choosing her own path now, with a man who saw her truly. It would be hard. Yes, but it would be honest. As dawn approached, she heard Jessie moving quietly through the house. She dressed in her sturdiest clothes, pinned her hair severely back, and took one last look around the room where she'd spent so many lonely nights. Then she picked up her valise, the same one she'd carried from Boston, now holding a different dream, and went to meet her future. Jessie waited by the door, his own pack slung over his shoulder, rifle in hand. He'd left a letter on the table. She noticed his final words to his brother. "Ready?" he asked. Clara took his offered hand, felt the calluses and scars that told the story of a life lived with purpose. "Ready?" They stepped out into the pre-dawn darkness. Somewhere behind them lay the wreckage of what might have been, but ahead, beyond the mountains etched against the brightening sky, lay the promise of what could be. As they mounted their horses and turned north, Clara didn't look back. She'd learned that sometimes the only way forward was to leave the past behind, buried like winter snow that melts to make way for spring. And despite everything, the violence, the betrayal, the uncertain future, she felt more free than she had since stepping off that train in Dry Gulch. She was Clara Whitmore no longer. She wasn't Mrs. James Colton either. She was simply Clara, riding toward a new life with a man who taught her that love wasn't about ownership or duty, but about choosing each other again and again, no matter the cost. The sun crested the mountains as they rode away, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and Clara, her hand briefly touching Jesse's as their horses walked side by side. Thought it looked like hope. The mountains gave them sanctuary for 3 days. Jesse knew these trails from hunting expeditions, leading them through passes that would be invisible to pursuers. They camped rough, sleeping under stars that seemed close enough to touch, sharing warmth and silence in equal measure. But on the 4th morning, as they descended toward the valley that would take them north, Jesse pulled up short. "Riders," he said quietly, pointing to dust rising in the distance. "Coming fast." Clara's heart sank. They both knew who it would be. James wouldn't let them go so easily, not with his pride wounded and whiskey still burning in his veins. "There." Jesse indicated a cluster of rocks. "Take cover. If this goes bad..." "I'm not leaving you." "Clara." "No." She met his eyes steadily. "Whatever comes, we face it together." The riders emerged from the dust. James and 3 men Clara recognized from town. Hard men with harder reputations. Her mouth went dry. Jesse dismounted slowly, keeping his hands visible. "James, you've made your point. Let us go." James looked terrible. Unshaven, red-eyed, clothes dusty from hard riding. But there was a clarity in his gaze that was somehow worse than drunken rage. "Can't do that, brother." His voice was calm, almost conversational. "See, I've been thinking about the ranch, about the years we put into it, about how you helped me build it up from nothing." "Keep it," Jesse said. "I told you." "Oh, I'm keeping it. But see, that's not enough. You took something from me, Jesse, something that can't be fixed with property lines." James's eyes flicked to Clara. "So I'm taking something from you." One of the men, a scarred brute named Hollis, smiled unpleasantly. "Heard there's horse thieves in these parts. Terrible what happens to horse thieves." Clara understood with sickening clarity. James meant to have Jesse hanged, legally or otherwise. "The horses are yours," she said desperately. "We'll leave them. Walk if we have to." "Quiet." James didn't look at her. "This is between brothers." Jesse's hand moved slowly toward his rifle. "Don't do this, James! Whatever you think happened, I know what happened." James's voice cracked slightly. "You always had to be better, didn't you? The war hero, the noble one, even had to be better at loving my wife. James, draw your gun. Jesse." James's hand hovered over his own pistol. "Let's settle this like men. I won't fight you. Then you'll hang." Hollis shifted in his saddle, rope already in hand. "Your choice." Clara saw Jesse's shoulders tense, saw him calculating odds, 4 against 1, and her to protect. She made a decision that came from somewhere deeper than thought. "Wait." She stepped forward, putting herself between the brothers. "James, listen to me, please. Get back, Clara." Jesse tried to pull her behind him, but she resisted. "No, he needs to hear this." She faced James squarely. "You want someone to blame? Blame me. I'm the one who answered your advertisement under false pretenses. I'm the one who came here running from my own troubles. I'm the one who..." "Who what?" James's eyes glittered dangerously. "Who fell in love with the wrong brother." The words came out steady, clear. "Jesse tried to keep his distance, tried to be honorable, but I pursued him. James, I wanted him. So if you need to punish someone, punish me." "Clara, no." Jesse's voice was agonized. James laughed, ugly and sharp. "Trying to save him? How touching. But you're wrong about something. Dear wife, I don't want to punish you. I want you to live with it. Live knowing you caused his death. Then you'll have to kill me too." Clara lifted her chin. "Because if you harm him, I'll make sure everyone knows what happened here. How you brought hired guns to murder your own brother. How you broke every code of the West. Your name will be mud from here to California. You think I care about my reputation? I think you care about the ranch, about the contracts with the Army, the deals with other ranchers. Who'll do business with a fratricide?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered in James's eyes. One of his men shifted uneasily. The code of the West was clear on certain things. You didn't kill your own blood, not over a woman. It was then they heard it. Horses approaching from the south. A lot of them. Jesse tensed, ready for anything. But Clara saw something change in James's face. The riders came into view, a full dozen men, led by Marshal Tom Bradley from Dry Gulch. Clara's knees went weak with relief. "Gentlemen," the marshal's voice carried authority. "Having a problem here?" "No problem. Marshal?" James tried for casual, but his voice was strained. "Just a family discussion. Funny, Mrs. Sarah Perkins came into town yesterday. Said she saw riders heading up here with purpose. Thought I should check on things." The marshal's eyes swept the scene, taking in Clara's bruised face, the positions of the men, the tension crackling like lightning. "Mrs. Colton, are you all right?" Clara felt all eyes on her. This was the moment. She could destroy James with a word. Could have him arrested, or at least driven off. But looking at him, seeing the defeat already creeping into his shoulders, she made a different choice. "There's been a misunderstanding. Marshal, my husband and I are separating. Jesse is helping me leave. James is upset. But no laws have been broken." The marshal studied her for a long moment. "That's so? And you're leaving of your own free will?" "Yes." "Well then." The marshal turned to James. "I suggest you and your friends head back to town. Let these folks go on their way peaceful-like." James's jaw worked. For a moment, Clara thought he might do something desperate. Then his shoulders slumped. "Yeah, all right." He looked at Jesse. And for just an instant, Clara saw the brother he might have been, young, lost, overshadowed. "The letter you left, I read it, about Gettysburg, about saving my life at Anderson Creek. I didn't know." Jesse was quiet for a moment. "Wasn't your fault you were too young to enlist? Wasn't your fault I came back changed?" "Maybe not, but what I became after..." James's voice trailed off. He straightened in his saddle. "Go on, then. Both of you. Go on and don't come back." He wheeled his horse around and rode away without looking back. His men followed, leaving dust and silence in their wake. The marshal lingered. "You sure about this? Mrs. Colton, I'm sure. And it's just Clara now. Clara Whitmore." The marshal touched his hat. "Well then, Miss Whitmore. Jesse, I'd suggest you move along quick. James is hurting now, but hurt can turn back to anger right fast." After the marshal and his men departed, Clara found herself shaking. Jesse pulled her into his arms, and she buried her face against his chest. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. "Shouldn't have put yourself between us. And you should have?" She pulled back to look at him. "Jesse, I chose this. Chose you. That means standing beside you, not behind you." He kissed her then, there in the dust and sunlight, with their uncertain future stretching before them. When they parted, his eyes held something Clara hadn't seen before, hope unmarred by guilt. They remounted and continued north. But the encounter had changed things. The shadow of James's threat no longer followed them. They were truly free now, to build whatever life they could manage. That night, camped by a clear stream, Jesse pulled out a small leather pouch. "I've been carrying this for years," he said, producing a simple gold ring. "It was my mother's. I know we can't marry proper, not with you still wed to James, but if you'd wear it..." Clara held out her hand without hesitation. The ring was worn smooth with age, too large for her finger, but Jesse produced a length of rawhide and threaded it through, creating a necklace. "Until we can do it right," he said, fastening it around her neck. "This is right." Clara touched the ring where it rested against her heart. "This is the only marriage that matters to me." They made love under the stars, slow and tender. No longer stolen moments, but a claiming of their future. Afterwards, Jesse told her about his plans. A piece of land he'd heard about in Montana, far from anyone who knew their story. They could raise horses, maybe, or cattle, build a life that was truly theirs. "It won't be easy," he warned. starting from nothing. And with winter coming, we're not starting from nothing. Clara traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival. We're starting with love, with trust, with the knowledge that we chose each other against all odds. That's more than most folks have. Jesse caught her hand, pressed it to his lips. How did I get so lucky? Not luck. Clara smiled in the darkness. Fate. I was meant to answer that advertisement, meant to take that train, but I was meant to find you, not James. We just took the long way around, as if in agreement. A shooting star streaked across the sky. Clara made a wish, not for ease or wealth or safety, but for the strength to face whatever came next. Beside her, Jesse pulled her closer, and she knew he'd wished for the same thing. Tomorrow they'd ride on, toward Montana and the uncertain promise of a new beginning. There would be hardships. She had no illusions about that. Winter would be brutal, money would be tight, and the ghost of what they'd left behind would follow them for a while yet. But tonight, wrapped in Jesse's arms with his mother's ring against her heart, Clara felt richer than she'd ever dreamed possible. She'd traveled west looking for security and respectability. Instead, she'd found something far more valuable, a love worth fighting for, a man who saw her true self, and the courage to choose her own path. The stream gurgled softly nearby, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, wild and free and unashamed. Clara smiled and closed her eyes, ready now for whatever tomorrow would bring. She'd been Clara Whitmore, the frightened girl from Boston. She'd been Clara Colton, the neglected wife. Now she was simply Clara, Jesse's woman, her own person, finally home in the wilderness of his arms. The cabin materialized out of the Montana snowstorm like something from a dream, or a nightmare, depending on how one looked at it. After 2 weeks of hard travel, sleeping rough and rationing supplies, the tiny structure Jesse had described seemed palatial to Clara, even half buried in snow and listing slightly to the east. It needs work, Jesse said unnecessarily, helping her down from Buttercup. The mare was worn thin from the journey, ribs showing despite their careful tending. It has walls and a roof. Clara's teeth chattered as she spoke. That's all that matters. They'd beaten the worst of winter by days, maybe less. The storm that caught them in the final miles had been a warning. Settle in now or perish. Jesse worked with desperate efficiency, clearing snow from the door, checking the chimney, assessing what repairs couldn't wait. The interior was sparse but solid. One room with a stone fireplace, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs that had seen better days. A ladder led to a loft that would serve as their bedroom. Previous occupants had left basics. A few pots, an axe, even some preserved goods in sealed jars. Why would anyone abandon this? Clara asked, running her hand along the sturdy walls. Man who built it lost his wife to fever last spring. Couldn't bear to stay. Jesse's voice was grim. Sold it to me for almost nothing through a land agent in Billings. Clara shivered, and not from cold. Starting their life together in a house of grief seemed an ill omen. But then Jesse's arms came around her from behind, solid and warm. We'll make it ours, he murmured against her hair. Fill it with better memories. That first night, they slept piled with every blanket they owned before a roaring fire, too exhausted for anything but survival. But when Clara woke to find Jesse already working, patching the worst gaps in the walls, organizing their meager supplies, she felt a fierce surge of determination. They would survive this. They would thrive. The days blurred together in a rhythm of necessary labor. Jesse hunted when the weather allowed, bringing back rabbit, deer, once a small elk that would see them through weeks. Clara learned to stretch their supplies, to make filling meals from almost nothing. She mended their clothes until there was more patch than original fabric, kept the fire burning, melted snow for water. In the evenings, by firelight, they talked, really talked, in a way they never could have at the ranch. Jesse told her about the war, not the glory-seeking tales James had always wanted to hear, but the truth, the mud and blood and senseless waste, the friends who died in his arms, The bullet that nearly took his leg at Gettysburg, and the field hospital where he'd begged them not to amputate. Told them I'd rather die whole than live in pieces, he said, staring into the flames. Fool thing to say, but they listened. God knows why. Probably figured I'd die anyway. So why waste time cutting? But you didn't die. Clara threaded her fingers through his. No, though sometimes I wondered why. What was the point of surviving when so many better men didn't? He looked at her then, and his eyes held something soft and wondering. I know now, though I survived to find you, to have this. They made love in their loft bed while snow piled against the windows, creating their own warmth against the bitter cold. Jessie was endlessly gentle with her, endlessly giving, as if trying to make up for all the tenderness she'd been denied before. Clara discovered her own power in those moments, the way her touch could make this strong, stoic man tremble, the sounds she could draw from his throat, the peace she could bring to his troubled eyes. I love you, she whispered against his scarred skin, again and again, until the words became prayer and promise combined. I love you, I love you, I love you. Winter deepened, bringing challenges they hadn't anticipated. The wolves came first, drawn by desperation and the scent of their meager livestock, 2 chickens and a milk goat Jessie had traded for in the last settlement. Clara woke to their howling one night to find Jessie already reaching for his rifle. Stay here, he commanded, but Clara was already pulling on her boots. Like hell. They stood together in the doorway, the rifle in Jessie's hands, Clara holding a torch. The wolves circled just beyond the light's reach, eyes glowing green in the darkness. Jessie fired once, into the ground near the pack leader. The sound cracked through the night like thunder, and the wolves melted away. But they'd be back. They always came back. The real test came in January, when Jessie fell ill. It started as a cough, nothing serious. But within days he was burning with fever, delirious, calling out names of men long dead. Clara had never been so terrified. She did everything she knew, cooled his fever with snow, forced willow bark tea between his lips, kept him warm, but not too warm. She prayed to a God she'd half stopped believing in, bargained with the universe, promised anything if Jessie would just live. On the 3rd night, his fever broke. Clara found him looking at her with clear eyes for the first time in days. You stayed, he whispered, voice raw. Where else would I go? She tried for lightness but failed, tears streaming down her face. You're stuck with me, Jessie Colton. Not Colton anymore, he managed. Need a new name, both of us. Clara thought about it as she spooned broth into him, coaxed him back to strength. He was right. They couldn't be Coltons here, couldn't risk that connection following them. But what to call themselves? The answer came from Jessie's fever dreams. He'd called out for someone named Mitchell, a friend from the war. Clara gathered, a good man who'd died saving others. Mitchell, she said one evening as Jessie sat up for the first time, still weak but improving. Mr. and Mrs. Jessie Mitchell. Jessie's eyes went bright with unshed tears. He'd have liked that. Tom Mitchell, best man I ever knew. Besides, he swallowed. Besides the one I can't call brother anymore. They didn't speak of James often, but his ghost lingered. Clara sometimes caught Jessie staring south, and she knew he was thinking of the ranch, of the brother he'd raised and lost. The guilt ate at him. She could see it, but when she tried to comfort him, to absolve him, he'd just shake his head. Some things can't be fixed with words, he'd say. Just have to live with them. Make the living worth the cost. Spring came slowly, reluctantly, like a wild animal coaxed from hiding. The snow melted in patches, revealing ground they could work. Jessie, fully recovered now, threw himself into planning. They'd plant vegetables, expand the cabin, maybe acquire a few cattle if they could manage it, build something lasting. Clara watched him work one morning, shirt off despite the lingering chill, breaking ground for their garden. The scars on his back caught the sunlight, some from the war, others from a lifetime of hard labor. Beautiful to her, every mark a story of survival. She touched the ring at her throat, his mother's ring that she never removed. They couldn't marry legally, not with her still bound to James, but in every way that mattered. Jesse was her husband. This was her home. It was then she felt it, the flutter in her belly that she'd been ignoring for weeks, hoping she was wrong, hoping she was right. She pressed a hand to her still flat stomach and knew with sudden certainty. A child. Jesse's child. The joy and terror of it took her breath away. How could they manage a baby out here? So far from help. What if something went wrong? But under the fear was something stronger. A fierce protectiveness. A love already blooming for this tiny life they'd created. She waited until evening to tell him, when they sat before the fire with cups of pine needle tea, pleasantly tired from the day's labor. Jesse was sketching plans for a barn on a piece of bark, talking about the future with an enthusiasm that made her heart ache with love. "Jesse," she caught his hand, stilling his drawing. "I have something to tell you." He looked up, caught something in her expression that made him set aside his plans. "What is it?" The words stuck, too momentous for easy speaking. "We're going to have a baby." The emotions that crossed his face were like watching weather change. Shock, fear, wonder, and finally, blazing joy. He pulled her into his arms, buried his face in her neck, and she felt him trembling. "A baby," he breathed. "Our baby." "Oh, Clara, sweet God. Are you happy?" she asked, though she could feel the answer in the way he held her. "Happy?" He pulled back to look at her, and his eyes were wet. I don't have words. Scared, grateful, so damn grateful." He kissed her softly, reverently. "When?" "Late summer. I think September, maybe early October. We'll need supplies. A midwife. There's a settlement about 30 miles north. They might have—" He was already planning, already protecting. "Can't risk you being alone when the time comes. We have months to prepare." Clara cupped his face, felt the day's stubble against her palms. "Right now. Just be here with me. With us." Jesse's hand drifted to her belly, hesitant, wondering. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your PA, and I promise you, I swear on everything holy, you'll never doubt you're loved. Never wonder if you belong. You're wanted. Little one, so very wanted." Clara covered his hand with hers, their fingers interlacing over the promise of new life. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and the wind sighed through the pines. But inside their small cabin, in the circle of firelight and love, Clara felt the whole world contained. They'd traveled so far to reach this moment, through deception and heartbreak, violence and winter storms. They'd lost everything and found each other. Now they were building something new, something theirs, a family, a future. "I love you," Jesse said, the words carrying weight of promise and prophecy. "I love you too." Clara leaned into his warmth, closed her eyes, and let herself believe in the impossible gift of happiness after sorrow. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. They'd need to prepare for the baby, expand the cabin, lay in supplies. There'd be long days of labor and longer nights of worry. But tonight, with Jesse's arms around her and their child growing beneath her heart, Clara Mitchell, for that's who she was now, in all ways but law, was complete. The letter arrived on a day when the world seemed particularly golden, carried by a traveling merchant who'd asked in 3 settlements before finding the Mitchell place up by Crow Creek. Clara was hanging wash, her belly round with 7 months of pregnancy, when Jesse came from the trading post with an expression she'd never seen before. "It's from James," he said simply, holding out the travel-worn envelope. Clara's hand stilled on the wet sheet. They'd heard nothing from Wyoming in the months since their flight. She'd assumed, hoped, that chapter was closed forever. But here was James's familiar scrawl, addressed to Jesse Colton or Jesse Mitchell, wherever you may be found. They sat together on the porch steps Jesse had built just last month, the letter between them like a live coal. Finally, Jesse broke the seal and read aloud. "Brother, I reckon you're still my brother. Despite everything, I'm writing because you deserve to know. I'm sick. Doc says it's my liver. All those years of whiskey finally collecting their due. Got maybe 6 months, maybe less. I want to see you before the end. Not to fight or blame. That's done. But there's things need saying, and papers need signing. The ranch is yours by rights. Half of it always was. I've had documents drawn up legal and proper. I know I've got no claim on your time or your forgiveness. But if you could see your way to coming, even for a day, it would ease my passing. Your brother still... James." Jesse's voice had grown rough by the end. He set the letter aside, stared out at the mountains they'd come to love. Clara waited, knowing this had to be his decision. "I can't," he said finally. "Can't leave you, especially now. Can't risk going back." "Yes, you can." Clara surprised herself with the words. "You need to..." Jesse turned to her, disbelief written plain on his face. "Clara, he's your brother, your only family besides..." She placed a hand on her belly. "This child deserves to know you made peace with your past, and you deserve to say goodbye without guilt. What if it's a trap? What if... Then you'll handle it, but I don't think it is. That letter, that's a dying man looking for absolution." Jesse was quiet for a long time. "Then, you'd come with me. To Wyoming?" Clara considered. The journey would be hard, especially pregnant, but... "Yeah, if you need me to." "No." His response was immediate. "Too dangerous. The travel alone could..." He touched her belly gently. "I won't risk you, either of you." In the end, it was decided. Jesse would go alone, travel fast, return within a month. Their nearest neighbors, the Thurstons, would check on Clara daily. She'd have supplies, the rifle, everything she needed. "I don't like it," Jesse said the night before his departure, holding her close in their bed. "Everything in me says to stay, and everything in me says you need to go." Clara kissed him softly. "Make your peace, Jesse, for all of us." He left at dawn, and Clara watched until horse and rider disappeared into the morning mist. Then she turned back to their cabin, their home, and began the long wait. The days passed slowly. Clara filled them with work, preparing for the baby, tending the garden that was finally producing food. Mrs. Thurston came by every other day, bringing gossip and checking Clara's condition with the practiced eye of a woman who'd birthed 8 children. "Carrying low," she pronounced. "That'll be a boy. Mark my words." Clara smiled but said nothing, boy or girl. She just wanted the child healthy and Jesse home safe. It was 2 weeks later when she heard horses approaching. Too many horses. Her heart seized. Jesse would return alone. Multiple riders meant trouble. She reached for the rifle, checked the load, positioned herself by the window. But the man who dismounted in her yard wasn't a threat. He was dying. James Colton looked like a scarecrow dressed in clothes too big for his wasted frame. His face was yellow-tinged, eyes sunken, but he sat his horse straight and dismounted without help. Behind him, Jesse swung down from his own mount, face tight with concern. "Clara." James removed his hat, and she saw his hands shake slightly. "I asked Jesse to let me come. Need to say some things. Won't take long." Clara lowered the rifle, opened the door. "James." He climbed the porch steps slowly, like an old man, though he couldn't be more than 30. When he reached the top, he had to catch his breath. "You look well," he said, eyes taking in her obvious pregnancy. "Mountain life agrees with you. Would you like some water? Coffee? Water would be kind." They sat awkwardly around the table where Clara and Jesse had shared so many meals. James drank slowly, gathering strength or courage or both. Jesse stood by the door, watchful, one hand never far from his sidearm. "I practiced this speech all the way here," James began. "Had it all worked out, but now..." He shook his head. "You were a good wife. Clara, better than I deserved. I'm sorry for how I treated you." Sorry for the drinking and the women and the neglect. You came all that way expecting a husband, and I gave you a shadow." Clara found her voice. "We were both trying to be people we weren't. I wanted security. You wanted respectability. Neither of us was looking for love. No, but you found it anyway." James looked at Jesse then, and Clara saw something pass between the brothers. Old pain, older affection. With the right man, the better man. "James," Jesse started, but his brother held up a hand. "Let me finish. I've got maybe 2 months left, and I mean to use them clearing debts." He pulled out a leather folder, laid it on the table. "The ranch is yours. Jesse. Both your names are on it now. Mr. and Mrs. Jesse Mitchell, as you're calling yourselves. Free and clear. No obligations. We can accept. You can and you will." James's voice held a ghost of its old authority. "It's not charity. It's justice. That ranch is half yours by rights. And Clara's owed something for the misery I put her through." He managed a weak smile. "Besides, what am I going to do with it? Can't take it where I'm going." He pulled out another paper. "This here's a divorce decree, signed by a judge in Cheyenne. Abandonment and desertion. My desertion, not yours. Clara, you're free to marry proper, if you've a mind to." Clara's vision blurred with unexpected tears. "James, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll be happy. That's all I want." He stood carefully, clearly exhausted by even this brief visit. "One more thing, Jesse. Walk with me?" The brothers stepped outside, and Clara watched through the window as they talked. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw James grip Jesse's shoulder, saw Jesse bow his head. When they embraced, carefully, because of James's frailty, Clara had to turn away from the private moment. James left within the hour, despite their offers to let him rest. "Got a room in town?" he said. "And a bottle of laudanum for the pain. I'll be comfortable enough." As his horse picked its way down the trail, Clara asked, "What did he say to you at the end?" Jesse's voice was rough. "He said he was proud of me, that I was the brother he'd always wanted to be, and that—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "That he was glad I'd have a family. Said maybe I could name a son after him, if we were so inclined. The James, before the whiskey got him." "Oh, Jesse." He pulled her close, and they stood together watching the dust of James's passage settle. "When it was gone," Jesse said quietly, "he'll be dead before winter. I know. Part of me wants to hate him still, for what he did to you, to us." "Don't!" Clara touched his face. "He's giving us everything. Jesse, the ranch, if we want it. Freedom to marry, most of all, his blessing. That takes courage for a proud man. You want to go back to Wyoming?" Clara thought about it. The ranch was established, profitable. It would be an easier life than what they were building here. But, "No," she said finally. "That's the past. This is our future. But maybe we could sell the Wyoming place. Use the money to buy more land here. Build that barn you're always drawing." Jesse smiled. The first real smile since James's letter arrived. "Mrs. Mitchell, you're a wise woman. Not Mitchell much longer," she reminded him. "Soon as we can find a preacher, I'm making an honest man of you. Too late for that." But his eyes were warm. "I've been an honest man since the day you agreed to run away with me." James died 6 weeks later. Word came from the lawyer handling the estate, along with papers to sign and a personal note from the doctor who'd tended him at the end. "He spoke of you both often." The doctor wrote, "Whatever had passed between you, know that he left this world at peace." They were married 2 days after the news arrived, in the Thurstons' parlor with their neighbors as witnesses. Clara wore her best dress, let out to accommodate her belly. Jesse had shaved and put on his one good shirt. It wasn't the wedding either had imagined in their youth, but it was perfect in its simplicity. "Do you, Jesse Mitchell, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The circuit preacher was young, earnest, trying to give the moment the gravity it deserved. "I do." Jesse's voice was steady. "Sure." "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" I do. The words she'd said before, in fear, she now said in joy. When Jesse kissed her, the baby kicked hard enough to make them both laugh. The preacher looked scandalized at performing a wedding for a woman so obviously with child. But the Thurstons had assured him of the circumstances. A previous marriage dissolved. A love that had waited for freedom. That night, in their bed as lawfully wedded husband and wife. Clara traced the lines of Jesse's face in the moonlight. "Any regrets?" she asked. "Only one." He kissed her palm. "That it took so long to get here. Worth the wait. Worth everything." The baby kicked again, and Jesse's hand joined Clara's over the movement. "What do you think? James for a boy?" "James Thomas Mitchell," Clara agreed. "After both brothers who made this possible? And if it's a girl? Sarah, after my mother." Jesse was quiet a moment. "She'd have loved you. Would have said you were too good for any of her boys. She'd have been wrong." Clara shifted closer, despite her bulk. "I'm exactly good enough for you, Jesse Mitchell, and you for me." Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, soft and silent. But inside their cabin, warm and legal and loved, Clara felt only the approaching spring, the child growing beneath her heart, the man holding her close, the future spreading before them like a trail through new country, waiting to be explored. They'd sell the Wyoming ranch, she decided drowsily. Use the money to build something even better here. Maybe start a school for the settlers' children. Definitely expand their cabin for the family they'd have. The future was theirs now, bought with pain, but paid for in love. As sleep took her, Clara thought she understood now why she'd answered that long-ago advertisement. Not for James, though he'd played his part. Not even for Jesse initially, though he'd become everything. She'd answered it for this moment, this life, this chance to choose her own happiness and build it board by board, season by season, child by child. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. But tonight, Clara Mitchell slept in her husband's arms, their baby safe between them, the past forgiven and the future bright with promise. And in her dreams, she was already teaching their children to read by lamplight, while Jesse carved toys from pine and told stories of how their parents found each other against all odds. It was, she thought just before sleep claimed her, exactly the life she'd never known to want, which made it all the sweeter now that it was hers. The pain started just as the first September frost silvered the grass. Clara had been preparing breakfast when the deep, rolling ache seized her back. She gripped the table edge, breathing through it, telling herself it was just the baby shifting. But when the second pain came, stronger and more insistent, she knew. "Jesse!" Her voice came out strained. He was by the door, pulling on his boots for the day's work. I think it's time." The boots hit the floor. In 2 strides, he was beside her, face pale beneath his tan. "The baby. Now. Babies come when they're ready, not when we—" She gasped as another contraction rolled through her. "You need to get Mrs. Thurston. I can't leave you. You have to. She knows what to do. I don't—" Clara bit back a cry. The pains were coming faster than she'd expected. "Jesse, please, ride fast." He kissed her hard, quick, desperate. "Don't you dare have this baby without me. I'll do my best." She managed, trying for humor. "Now go!" He went, and Clara was alone with her body's ancient rhythm. She walked when she could, gripped the furniture when she couldn't. The sun climbed higher, and still Jesse didn't return. The pains grew stronger, closer together, and Clara began to understand why women whispered about childbirth in hushed, fearful tones. When Jesse finally burst through the door with Mrs. Thurston and another woman Clara didn't recognize, she was on her knees by their bed, tears streaming down her face. "There now, child." "Mrs." Thurston said briskly, taking charge. "This here's Mrs. Adeline Crawford, best midwife in 3 territories. You're in good hands." The hours that followed blurred together in Clara's memory. Pain and pressure. Mrs. Crawford's calm instructions. Mrs. Thurston's encouraging murmurs. Jesse's hand in hers, letting her squeeze until his bones creaked, his voice in her ear, telling her she was brave, she was strong, she could do this. "I can see the head." "Mrs." Crawford announced what felt like days later. "Dark hair, just like Papa. One more push. Clara, give me one more." Clara bore down with strength she didn't know she possessed, a sound tearing from her throat that was part scream, part war cry. And then, suddenly, pressure released and a new voice filled the cabin. Tiny, indignant, alive. "It's a boy." "Mrs." Crawford said, lifting the squalling infant. "A fine, healthy boy." Jesse made a sound Clara had never heard from him, half sob, half laugh. His hands shook as Mrs. Crawford placed their son on Clara's chest. The baby was red and wrinkled, still crying, the most beautiful thing Clara had ever seen. "James Thomas Mitchell," she whispered, touching the dark fuzz of his hair. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." Jesse's hand covered hers on their son's back. "He's perfect. God, Clara, he's perfect." Later, after Mrs. Crawford had cleaned them both up, and Mrs. Thurston had changed the bedding, and both women had departed with promises to check back tomorrow. The little family lay together in the bed Jesse had built with his own hands. Baby James nursed fitfully, making small sounds of contentment. "I thought I'd lost you," Jesse admitted quietly. "When you were in such pain, when you were crying out, I kept thinking this was my punishment, that God would take you for all my sins." "Hush," Clara touched his face. "No more talk of punishment or sins. We've paid for our happiness. Jesse, this child is our blessing, not our burden." He kissed her temple, gentle and reverent. "How did I get so lucky?" "Not luck." Clara echoed words from long ago. "Fate, or maybe just the courage to choose love over duty." As the weeks passed, they settled into the rhythm of new parenthood. Jesse proved as gentle with his son as he'd always been with Clara, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor during colicky nights, staring at the baby with wonder that never seemed to diminish. The money from the ranch sale came through in October, more than they'd dared hope, enough to buy additional land, build a proper barn, maybe even start that school Clara dreamed of. They made plans by firelight while James slept between them, their future finally secure. It was December when the letter came from Boston. Clara recognized the handwriting with a jolt, her cousin Martha, who'd been like a sister before Uncle Tobias drove them apart. "Clara," the letter began, "I pray this finds you. Though I had to write to 6 postmasters to trace you, Uncle Tobias died last month. The drink finally took him. He left nothing but debts. But in going through his papers, I found something that belongs to you." Enclosed was another document, their grandmother's will, hidden all these years. She'd left Clara a small inheritance, not much by Boston standards, but enough to matter. Money that should have given her choices, that might have saved her from ever answering that mail-order bride advertisement. "Does it change anything?" Jesse asked, watching her read. "Knowing you could have stayed, had other options." Clara looked around their cabin, at her husband feeding their son by the window, at the life they'd built through struggle and sacrifice. "No," she said firmly. "It changes nothing. Every choice, every hardship, led me here, led me to you and James. I wouldn't trade this life for all the inheritances in Boston." Spring came early that year, and with it, a steady stream of new settlers. The Thurston boys helped Jesse raise the barn frame in exchange for help with their own building come summer. Clara, with Martha's inheritance added to their funds, began planning for the school. Nothing fancy, just a single room where children could learn their letters and numbers, where knowledge could take root in this wild country. Young James grew like a weed. Jesse's dark hair and Clara's bright eyes. He took his first steps in the garden Clara had planted, said his first word, "Pa," while watching Jesse work. Every milestone was a celebration, every day a gift they'd almost been denied. One evening, as summer painted the sky purple and gold, Clara found herself in the exact spot where she'd stood that first night in Montana, uncertain and afraid. Now Jesse's arms came around her from behind, familiar as breathing. James played at their feet, chasing fireflies with chubby hands. Regrets? Jesse asked, echoing that old question. Never. Clara leaned back into his strength. You? Just one. She turned in his arms, concerned. What? That James, my brother, never got to meet his namesake, never got to see what his sacrifice made possible. Jesse's voice was thoughtful rather than sad. I think he would have been a good uncle. The James he could have been. I mean, he knows, Clara said softly. Somehow, I think he knows. They stood together watching their son play, the past finally at peace, the future bright before them. Tomorrow there would be work. There was always work. The new calves to tend, the school building to start, a community to help build. But tonight, there was just this, a family forged in the crucible of difficult choices, stronger for having been tested. Mama, James toddled over, arms raised. Up, Clara lifted him, settled him on her hip. Shall I tell you a story, little one? Tori, James agreed enthusiastically. Once upon a time, Clara began, there was a brave girl who got on a train, looking for adventure. Jesse's arm came around them both, holding his entire world in the circle of his embrace. And Clara told their son the story, edited for young ears, of how sometimes the wrong turn leads to the right destination, how love can bloom in the most unlikely places, and how choosing your own path, no matter how difficult, is always worth the journey. The stars came out one by one above Montana's vast sky, and Clara thought of another young woman, scared and alone on a train heading west. She'd thought she was running away from something. Instead, she'd been running toward everything that mattered. And they lived happily ever after? Jessie prompted when she reached the end, their son drowsing against her shoulder. No, Clara said, smiling. They lived, really lived, with all the joy and sorrow and struggle that means, but they lived it together, and that made all the difference. She looked up at her husband, the man who'd written letters for his brother that revealed his own heart, who'd chosen honor until honor became impossible, who'd given up everything to build this life with her. I love you, Jessie Mitchell, she said, meaning it with every fiber of her being. And I love you, Clara Mitchell. He kissed her, soft and sweet, while their son slept between them. The cabin door stood open to the summer night, letting in the sound of crickets and the scent of wild roses. Inside, the family Jessie and Clara had fought so hard to create settled in for another night in their hard-won paradise. And somewhere, carried on the mountain wind, came the echo of all the choices that had brought them here. Difficult choices, painful choices, but ultimately the right choices, because sometimes the heart knows what it wants long before the head catches up. And sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a mail-order bride choosing the wrong twin, only to discover that fate had been guiding her to the right one all along. Thank you for listening to this tale from the Wild West. Friends, I hope Clara and Jessie's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this story from? Drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like those brave souls who ventured west all those years ago. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, loss, and redemption on the frontier. Share your thoughts. Did you see that twist coming? What would you have done in Clara's shoes? Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your dreams, no matter how distant they may seem.